Snake Eyes, smoke these fools if they don't subscribe. Yo, Joe!
Black Forest from 2026. This one written, directed and starring AJ Constantino. I think I pronounced that right. Anyway, and this is a hybrid found footage / traditionally filmed footage movie. Very low budget, and the story is that it focuses on this couple initially, and the guy finds a camera out in the forest somewhere, and he picks it up, takes it home with him, and starts looking at the memory card. And there seems to be on this memory card footage of this group of friends that have gone hiking, and that's your found footage style section to the movie. And something seems to be happening to this kind of group of people that have gone camping, where maybe some type of third-party influence is kind of coming in and sort of taking control, and this then starts to take control of the guy watching it. But he is actually taking prescribed drugs for a mental condition, and as such we don't quite know if it's something that is genuinely happening or if it's just him having some effects from his condition. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about it, what works in this movie's favour. Now, there have been a few hybrid found footage and traditionally filmed footage style movies before, and generally speaking I'm not a fan of it, because I don't think the conceit of found footage works when you break the illusion of it being, you know, recovered footage as such. But I do think in this case the framing device is actually relatively good. So we have, you know, this guy watching these files, and then we are watching them as he watches them, if that makes sense. So, like, you know, even though you're kind of like not watching like over his shoulder, so to speak, I think the actual conceit there is probably the best that you can get. I mean, the found footage doesn't get you immersed like a straight found footage movie would necessarily do, but I think if you want to have a hybrid movie, this is probably one of the best ways to kind of have that. I also think because we have really two timelines in this movie, having two distinct styles gives a kind of point of difference, because obviously one is filmed like a traditional movie, you know, and the other is found footage, and as such they are quite sort of different from one another. So they're easy, you know, you're easily sort of oscillating between these kind of two styles and these two sort of storylines. So there is that. So that kind of aspects that I quite liked. And I will say, I think as the story goes on, having this kind of this effect come from this kind of footage and now affecting the people watching it is an interesting one, especially when you kind of blend in with the fact that is there something supernatural going on, or is this an effect of either you know, taking sort of drugs or sort of mental illness or what have you, and obviously the movie trying to kind of play that somewhat kind of ambiguously. So that aspects of it I quite liked. So I guess to kind of like sum that up is that I think the concept of this movie is interesting and has some kind of like some merit to it. So, you know, I think at least there's an interesting story in here. However, what doesn't work in this movie, the biggest thing, is some really poor acting. With found footage, the found footage sequences especially are pretty bad, but none of the acting is particularly strong in this movie overall. But some of the acting here is incredibly unrealistic, let me just kind of say that. Now I think also to compound this problem, and this is especially true of the found footage sequences again, is that it appears to be the lines have been like re-recorded, ADR'd. And when you're watching this, what it feels like is a foreign movie that's got a kind of English language soundtrack playing over it. That's kind of how it feels like. But that, you know, it is an American movie. So you have this kind of fake, kind of artificial sounding audio on it with some pretty poor performances. Now, we presume that obviously the actors that have spoken the original lines have probably spoken in the re-recorded sessions, if that's what it is. But the performance isn't strong, and the way that it sounds kind of artificial. So the net result is the acting overall sounds pretty terrible, I think, down to those two factors. But even in our traditionally filmed sequences, I still don't think the acting is necessarily good, but I think in some respects you can kind of get away a little bit more with a kind of the production, the more kind of overproduced kind of style of it. But in found footage, it's meant to be raw, edgy, you know, you're picking up the ambient noise and all the rest of it. But yeah, so because of this, you can never buy into the premise because the acting is so poor, and it's just not a visually centered movie. I said there's not a lot happening on screen. It is primarily down to our characters, because it is such a low budget movie. The story is driven by a lot of characters, you know, having dialogue without really a lot of happening on screen. And where this dialogue is delivered poorly, it doesn't become particularly good. I also think the actual written dialogue, I think the story concept in regards to the writing is relatively strong, but the kind of dialogue sometimes isn't brilliant to start with, to be honest with you. The movie is clearly suffering from a very low budget. I read on IMDb that it was around $4,000, something like that. And as such, you can clearly see the limitations here. And there's like a couple of kind of like spooky video effects, I suppose you want to call it. But it just looks sort of cheesy, I have to say. And I didn't think the characters were particularly well fleshed out either. You know, not to the point where you really sort of care about them or kind of rooting for them. So I think in regards certainly to the writing, there's certainly some decent story ideas here. But I think the actual script isn't particularly strong. The character work isn't particularly strong. As I say, outside of the script, the delivery of the dialogue and the production also doesn't help this movie. And this movie is pretty flat, visually speaking, I have to say. I mean, like I say, it's a low budget movie. There's nothing really kind of interesting happening on screen at any point. It's just kind of like people talking to the camera, or sort of, you know, it just sort of people sat in a room and things like that. So visually speaking, it's not particularly interesting. And because you're just watching this film with some quite poor acting and things like that, it's not a particularly fun film to sit through, I have to say. Which is a shame. Like, as I say, I do think there's a germ of a good idea here, really. So the concept, I think, could potentially be fleshed out and improved, maybe with a higher budget, or because sometimes you'll find that filmmakers will kind of redo a previous project, and perhaps that might be the path forward for this one. Yeah, but it needed a little bit more visual pizzazz to it, so it was just a very sort of dull movie to kind of look at. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What were your thoughts? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.
I am Skeletor, leader of the Geek Legion of Doom! Bow before our might!